Snow fell thick over Stockholm that night. The heavy, wet kind that absorbs sound and swallows the city's heartbeat. Street lamps painted the air in pale halos. The water beneath Stockholmsbron Bridge moved sluggishly, black as ink, flecked with shards of reflected light. At 2:12 a.m., the bridge was empty. At 2:13 a.m., it wasn't. A man appeared from the eastern end. No one saw where he came from. No footsteps in snow. No shadows on the approach. Just there, suddenly, as though the cold itself had shaped him from the darkness. He was tall, mid-50s, dressed in an immaculate charcoal overcoat, the kind tailored for boardrooms and state dinners, not for sprinting barefoot across a frozen bridge in the dead of night. In his right hand, he clutched something, a small square of paper, folded and crushed in his grip. The first thing to reach the night air wasn't his body. It was his voice. Jalp. The word tore itself from his throat, raw and desperate. It hung in the still air, echoing off the iron beams. Somewhere in the distance, a snowplow rumbled. But on the bridge, there was only the man, the snow, and the faint, labored sound of his breath. He didn't run like someone escaping a petty thief. He ran like someone whose reality had collapsed behind him. Halfway across, he slowed. His head whipped back over his shoulder, not at a sound, but at the absence of one. His pupils were blown wide, black pools in a face streaked with melting snow. The wind tugged at his coat, revealing the bare skin of his ankles, reddened from the ice. He mouthed something else, too faint to hear, and then the night shifted. From opposite ends of the bridge, two black SUVs appeared, rolling in silence, headlights off until the last possible moment. The beams sliced through the snowfall, catching the man in their glare. His shadow stretched long and thin across the bridge's planks. He froze, chest heaving, torn between running forward or leaping into the water. The currents below were icy and slow, the kind of cold that numbs your muscles before you can scream. The first SUV stopped sharply, blocking his path. Two figures stepped out. Not police. Their coats were dark and heavy, but fitted with precision that suggested military tailoring. Black gloves. No badges. No hesitation. The man staggered back. His knees buckled. The paper in his hand slipped free and fluttered onto the snow, landing face up. A photograph, blurred by frost. Before he could collapse completely, the second SUV swung across the far end of the bridge. A rear door opened. Another figure emerged, taller, broader, face lost in shadow. The man tried one last scream, y'all, but it broke into a cough. One of the gloved figures caught him by the arm, almost gently, and guided him toward the waiting vehicle. His feet dragged, leaving no deep imprint in the snow. Only shallow marks that were already vanishing under falling flakes. From a northern end of the bridge, in a cramped security booth, a lone night watchman leaned toward his monitor, frowning. The feed showed the man being pulled toward the SUV, and then the picture warped. Static. 3 minutes of it. When the feed returned, the bridge was empty. No man, no cars, no photograph. Just a crown of Stockholmsbron glinting under the street lamp and a fresh layer of undisturbed snow. The watchman replayed the footage in disbelief. Same thing. Clean up to 2:13 a.m., then static, then nothing. He reached for the radio to call it in, but his finger froze on the transmit button. Something in his gut told him not to, because when he glanced at the live feed again, the camera was still rolling, and at the far end of the bridge, beneath the lamp, a single figure now stood, watching the booth. By sunrise, the bridge was sealed off. Yellow tape flapped in the icy wind, watched over by uniformed officers who spoke in low, clipped voices. Beneath them, the black water lapped against the stone supports, indifferent to the chaos above. Detective Ellen Forsberg stepped out of her unmarked Volvo and surveyed the scene. She had been with Stockholm's Violent Crimes Division for 12 years, long enough to know when a case didn't fit the template. And nothing about the call she received at 4:17 a.m. sounded like routine police work. The first officer she spoke to was pale, his words measured as though afraid of what they meant. No body. No vehicles. Just nothing. She frowned. Nothing. He pointed toward the middle of the bridge. Not even footprints. Ellen stepped past him, boots crunching over fresh snow. The bridge should have been littered with tracks. From the victim, from the supposed abductors, from the responding patrol. But except for the shallow marks left by her own officers during the cordon setup, the snow lay pristine. She crouched, running a gloved hand over the planks. The surface was cold, undisturbed, almost reset. The night watchman had already been taken to the station for questioning. Ellen's partner, Inspector Ramidal, was waiting by the booth. "You'll want to see this," he said, holding up a printed still from the CCTV feed. The image was grainy, but clear enough. A man mid-stride, barefoot, overcoat flaring, clutching what looked like a folded photograph. His mouth was open, caught in the middle of a shout. Ellen studied it for a long moment. "We have an ID?" Facial recognition tagged him as Henrik Lofgren, born 1966, CEO of Lofgren Energy AB, net worth around 600 million kronor. She raised an eyebrow. "And he's running barefoot across a bridge at 2 a.m? Rami hesitated before continuing. "There's more. Immigration records say he re-entered Sweden from Singapore yesterday. But customs has no passport scan, no arrival photo. Just a name typed into the system." Ellen's eyes narrowed. "Someone inserted him manually?" "Looks that way." A gust of wind rattled the booth's windows. Inside, the monitor looped the same corrupted footage. Henrik approaching static, then an empty bridge. Ellen replayed it 6 times, each time searching for something. A flicker, a shadow, a clue. But it was always the same. Then she noticed something on the bridge's far railing. A scrap of paper, half buried in snow. She brushed it free. It was a torn corner of glossy photo paper, the edge of a face visible in the fragment. A man's jawline, Asian features, and in the background, a hotel room. Before she could pocket it, a voice called out, "Detective Forsberg." One of the forensic techs jogged over, holding a handheld thermal scanner. "We swept for residual heat signatures." Nothing. It's like no one was out here for hours before or after. Ellen glanced back at the fragment in her hand, her mind racing. If Henrik Lofgren had really been on that bridge, he'd left nothing behind. No prints, no heat, no trail. And that meant one of 2 things. Either he'd been taken in a way she couldn't explain, or he'd never been there at all. The fragment of glossy paper from the bridge was enough to get the digital forensics team moving. By late afternoon, Detective Ellen Forsberg was in the evidence lab at Norrmalm Police Headquarters, watching as a technician carefully scanned the torn scrap into a high-resolution system. The lab smelled faintly of ozone and coffee gone stale. Computer fans hummed in the background, blending with the distant thud of elevator doors. On the screen, the torn image expanded, revealing more detail than the naked eye could catch. "Enhancing contrast," the technician muttered. Pixel by pixel, the face on the fragment sharpened. A man of East Asian descent, mid-40s, wearing a crisp white shirt. Behind him, a heavy beige curtain and a slice of ornate wooden furniture, a vanity table. The lighting was warm, yellow, artificial. The tech tapped a key, overlaying metadata from a fragment's chemical signature. Same paper stock used by a high-end photography chain in Southeast Asia. Very few printers in Sweden use this exact dye pattern. Ellen leaned forward. "Can you reconstruct the rest?" The text smiled faintly, dragging a new file onto the screen. The full image appeared, not torn, but whole. Henrik Lofgren stood to the left, wearing a casual navy shirt, smiling faintly as if mid-conversation. The Asian man was beside him, leaning in, but it wasn't the subjects that made Ellen's stomach knot. It was the timestamp in the bottom right corner. December 19th, 2024, 21:04 and 17 seconds. 2 days from now. Ellen exhaled slowly, her breath almost fogging the monitor's surface. Could be a glitch. The tech shook his head. "I checked the EXIF data embedded in the file. The date isn't just an overlay. It's consistent across the image's metadata. Camera models, shutter time, GPS, all match. This photo hasn't been digitally altered." Ellen's partner, Inspector Ramidal, stepped in from the hallway, holding a manila envelope. "We pulled something from Lofgren's financials," he said, laying out a printed credit card statement. "The last transaction was at the Amber Court Hotel. Singapore, charged less than 36 hours before the bridge incident. Amber Court, Ellen murmured, tapping her pen against the timestamp. And the background of photo? The tech brought up a reference photo from the hotel's website. The vanity table, the beige curtains, identical. But the booking records told another story. The room in the picture had been officially under renovation for the past 3 months. No check-ins, no staff assignments, no maintenance logs. Rami flipped open a folder. Interpol pinged us back. The man next to Henrik in the photo is Dr. Wei Jian, a Singaporean national. No criminal record, but he's been off the grid since 2019 after leaving a position at a biomedical research firm with heavy military contracts. Ellen looked at the clock on the wall. It was 6:47 p.m., meaning that if the timestamp was to be believed, this meeting wouldn't happen for another 50 hours. And yet, a piece of it had already been found on a bridge in Sweden. She stared at the smiling faces on the screen. 2 men, 1 future, 1 impossible photograph. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered, and a low voice spoke in perfect Swedish. Detective Forsberg, you're already too close. The line went dead. By morning, the photograph had been classified as sensitive evidence. Not by Ellen, not by her division, but by an email stamped with the seal of the Swedish Ministry of Justice. The order was brief and non-negotiable. All case materials pertaining to subject H. Lofgren are to be transferred immediately to the security service. Essay with diary suspio. No further investigation is to be conducted without clearance. Ellen read it twice, jaw tightening. She'd seen high-level interference before, usually in organized crime or espionage cases, but never this early, never this blunt. Her partner, Rami, was pacing beside her desk. Essay with diary suspio doesn't move this fast unless someone higher is leaning on them. Higher than the ministry? Ellen asked. He gave a grim half-smile. Try the Prime Minister's office. Before Ellen could answer, her desk phone rang. A clipped female voice introduced herself as Annika Stahl, Senior Liaison for Essay with diary suspio. Detective Forsberg, effective immediately. Your investigation into Henrik Lofgren is suspended. All physical evidence, digital files, and witness statements are to be turned over to my courier within the hour. Suspended? We're talking about a possible kidnapping. We're talking about a matter of national interest, Stahl interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. Failure to comply will result in disciplinary action and possible criminal charges under the National Security Act. Do you understand? The line clicked dead before Ellen could respond. By 11:30 a.m., 2 men in dark suits arrived at Normand HQ carrying empty evidence crates. They didn't sign in. They didn't speak. They simply walked the secure evidence room, collected everything, the photograph, the CCTV footage, the thermal scan reports, and left without a word. The only thing they didn't take was the torn scrap Ellen had kept in her coat pocket. She hadn't logged it. Rami stood by the window, watching the unmarked car pull away. You know they'll come back for that too. Ellen nodded. Then we moved faster. That afternoon, an encrypted USB drive arrived at Dagens Nyheter, one of Sweden's largest newspapers. Inside was a folder containing a copy of the full photograph, a set of partial flight manifests showing Henrik Lofgren boarding a private jet from Zurich to Singapore 3 days after the bridge incident, and a single JPEG image that made the newsroom fall silent. It was Henrik, standing in a crowded Zurich train station, wearing the same navy shirt as in the Singapore photo, date stamped, the day after his death. By 6 p.m., the newsroom's editor received a phone call from an untraceable number. 10 minutes later, every copy of the files was wiped from their servers. Reporters who had opened the USB found their laptops bricked, hard drives fried. At 6:45 p.m., Ellen's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. They erased Zurich. Amber Court is next. The snow in Stockholm was still falling when Ellen and Rami ducked into Kaffkoppen, a small cafe in Gamla Stan. They chose it for a reason. No cameras inside, cash only. An owner who didn't care who you were as long as you paid. Rami spread out the few scrap of evidence they had managed to keep hidden from Essay with diary suspio. The torn photo fragment. A handwritten copy of of the Zurich sighting details, and a printed credit card statement from Lofgren's Singapore stay at the Amber Court Hotel. Ellen sipped her coffee, eyes scanning the street outside. If Zurich is real, then someone's moving him after the bridge, which means that night wasn't a murder. Or was, Rami said, and we're looking at someone who knows how to replace a body well enough to fool every system we have. He slid a sheet of paper across the table, an Interpol report he'd quietly requested through a personal contact. It listed Henrik Lofgren's passport number, along with 4 other identities, each tied to a different country: Germany, the UAE, Singapore, and one with no issuing authority at all. Shadow passports, Rami said. Top-tier fakes. The kind you can flash at an airport and sail through. Ellen's eyes narrowed. You don't get those without powerful friends. 2 days later, a lead surfaced from an unexpected place. A retired German BKA officer named Klaus Meyer. He had been monitoring encrypted forums where intelligence dropouts traded information like currency. One of the threads mentioned Amber Court, room 714, the same room from the photograph, along with a series of Swedish poetry lines. The poem was unsettling. When snow falls in silence, the bridge forgets the footsteps. When the clock strikes 13, the man returns without a shadow. Klaus swore he had seen similar coded verses used in Cold War-era dead drops, where operatives would post them in innocuous publications as signals. The deeper Ellen and Rami dug, the stranger became. A Singaporean immigration officer confirmed that Henrik had entered, under the name Jonathan Reeves, using a diplomatic passport that did not exist in any database. A Swiss banker hinted, off the record, that Lofgren had moved a large sum into a numbered account controlled by a UN-affiliated humanitarian trust. And in Dubai, an oil trading company that had partnered with Lofgren's energy firm filed for sudden bankruptcy, erasing billions in assets overnight. Late one evening, Rami received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "Stop chasing him. He's chasing you." The attachment was a photograph, taken from street level, grainy but unmistakable. It showed Ellen and Rami at their table inside Kaufkoppen from 2 days ago. By midnight, Ellen had packed a single overnight bag. She and Rami booked tickets to Berlin under false names. Klaus Meyer was waiting there with something he claimed would blow the entire case open. They didn't know it yet, but Berlin would give them the first piece of proof that Henrik Lofgren's story wasn't just about Sweden. It was about a network that spanned continents and operated in the spaces between official records. And by the time they landed, someone would already be waiting for them. Berlin was gray, wet, and cold enough to bite through their coats. Ellen and Rami met Klaus Meyer in a quiet corner of Savigny-Platz, with a hum of passing trams masked their conversation. Klaus was a tall, spare man with a weathered face of someone who had spent too many years in the shadows. He handed Ellen a slim folder, his gloved fingers never lingering. Inside were 3 glossy photos, security stills from the Amber Court Hotel, Singapore. The first showed the reception desk. Henrik Lofgren, in his navy shirt, handing over what appeared to be a dark blue diplomatic passport. The clerk's face was blurred. The second showed Henrik stepping into the elevator with Dr. Wei Jian, the Asian man from the bridge photo. The third was time-stamped the night after the bridge incident in Sweden. Ellen's chest tightened. That's impossible. Klaus nodded slowly. Exactly. The room number on the photo, 714, matched the one in the earlier evidence. But Klaus had already done his homework. Room 714 has been listed as under renovation since August. No bookings. No maintenance. Yet my source in the hotel's IT department says the key card logs show it was accessed 8 times last week. Rami frowned. By who? By 3 different card IDs. None of them linked to any registered guests. Ellen flipped through the folder, stopping at a printed email in Malay. Klaus translated. It's a maintenance report, but it's written in code. Each line is an anagram of a shipment manifest. The final line reads, "Snow falls in silence. The man leaves no shadow." Same as the poem. They boarded the next flight to Singapore under assumed names. Ellen barely slept. She kept replaying the bridge in her mind. The black SUVs, the vanished footprints. the torn photo fragment. If Henrik had been in Singapore after that night, then the man on the bridge might not have been Henrik at all, or worse, might have been two different men at the same time. The Amber Court stood on a quiet street in the city's colonial district, a tall slab of mirrored glass that reflected the sky like water. The lobby smelled of jasmine and lemon polish. Everything gleamed, but the air felt too still, like a stage set. They asked for room 714. The clerk smiled politely and said it was closed for renovation. When pressed, she hesitated, eyes flicking to her camera in the corner, before repeating the same line, word for word. That night, Ellen and Rami watched the 7th floor from a cafe across the street. At 11:46 p.m., the lights in 714 flickered on. Two silhouettes moved inside, one tall, broad-shouldered, the other thinner. A curtain shifted, just enough for Ellen to glimpse a pale face and the flash of something metallic on the man's wrist. A watch. Her blood ran cold. She knew that watch. It was in the original bridge photograph, right before Henrik vanished. By dawn, room 714 was dark again. When they crossed the street to investigate, the door bore a fresh "Do Not Enter" maintenance sign, and the lock had been replaced. Inside the lobby, a cleaning cart rattled past. On its lower shelf, half hidden under folded towels, was a small envelope. Her name, Forsberg, was written on it in neat block letters. Inside was a single hotel key card and a note. "The shadow isn't his. It's yours." They flew back to Stockholm under forged documents. The hotel key card sealed in an evidence bag and hidden inside Ellen's carry-on. Neither of them spoke much during the flight. The note, "The shadow isn't his. It's yours," had sunk deep into Ellen's mind, twisting in ways she couldn't name. By the time they landed, Essay with Diary Suspio had already tightened its grip. The Lofgren file had been scrubbed from the Violent Crimes Division's database. Ellen's login now displayed an Access Revoked banner in bright red. But Rami had a backup plan. A friendly forensic pathologist named Dr. Anders Nystrom at the Karolinska Institute, who had quietly kept samples from Henrik's initial postmortem. In a quiet corner of the lab, Anders laid out 2 sealed vials on a stainless steel table. "Blood sample A," he said, tapping the first vial, "was taken the morning after the bridge incident. From the body, Essay with Diary Suspio recovered in secret. Blood sample B was taken 1 week earlier during a routine health screening Lofgren underwent for an insurance renewal." Ellen leaned over the workstation, watching as Anders ran the first sequence analysis. The results printed in tight, jagged lines across the monitor. "Sample A," Anders said, "is a 100% match for Henrik Lofgren, but also carries genetic markers that don't belong to him. Markers we know belong to a different individual." Ellen frowned. "Meaning?" Anders clicked to the next file. "Meaning this body had 2 DNA profiles, one overlaying the other, like someone spliced a second identity into his biology." Rami crossed his arms. "And sample B?" The second test processed more slowly. When it finished, Anders stared at the screen for a long moment before speaking. "Sample B is a perfect match, but not to Henrik Lofgren. It matches an Interpol red, notice fugitive from 1998. Name, Erik Hallström. Presumed dead in a boat fire off the coast of Norway." Ellen's voice was low. "So a week before the bridge, Henrik was actually Hallström?" Anders nodded grimly. "If you believe the genetics, yes. And here's the part that makes no sense. Both profiles show active cellular metabolism, meaning both identities were alive in that body at the same time. Before they could digest it, the lab's power flickered. The lights stuttered. On the monitor, the DNA data corrupted line by line, replaced by a single phrase repeated in block capitals. "Stop searching." And then the screen went black. That night, Ellen couldn't sleep. She stood at her apartment window, looking out over the frozen city. Somewhere out there, someone had the resources to change a man's very identity. Not just on paper, but in his blood. Her phone vibrated on the sill. "No caller ID." She answered, and the same low voice from before spoke. "Detective Forsberg. The man on the bridge wasn't Henrik Lofgren, and he wasn't Erik Hallström. He was both, and neither, just like you will be if you keep going." The line went dead. The meeting place was a derelict train maintenance depot in eastern Berlin, the kind of building the city had forgotten. Its brick walls mottled with decades of graffiti, its windows shattered and patched with plywood. Klaus Meyer had chosen for one reason: no active CCTV, no nearby businesses, no foot traffic after dark. Ellen and Rami arrived an hour early, slipping into a rusted service door. The air smelled of oil and damp steel. Rami checked her perimeter while Ellen set her recorder to standby. She wasn't sure she'd live long enough to play it back, but it felt like a necessary insurance. At 23:07, Klaus emerged from the shadows, a black messenger bag slung across his chest. His eyes moved constantly, every shadow a possible threat. Without preamble, he placed the bag on a workbench and unzipped it. Inside were 6 passports. Ellen picked one up. The cover read European Union, Sweden, but when she flipped the photo page, her breath caught. The face staring back was Henrik Lofgren, but the name read Andreas Falk, occupation, cultural attaché, Embassy of Sweden in Abu Dhabi. The next passport was Singaporean, the next German, another from the United Arab Emirates. One had no issuing country at all, only a plain navy cover, and the word diplomat embossed in gold. "These," Klaus said quietly, "are shadow passports. They're printed on the same materials as legitimate ones, coded into certain airport systems, but they don't exist in any public database. They're issued for operations that officially never happened." Ellen flipped through the German passport. Same photo, different name, Maximilian Ruther. How many identities did he have? Klaus's voice dropped. "As far as I can tell, at least 9. And here's the part you won't like. One of them is still active. The last border crossing on it was 3 days ago, into Sweden." Rami frowned. "From where?" Klaus hesitated. "Zurich." Before they could react, a sharp metallic clink echoed through the depot. Somewhere above them, glass shattered. Klaus's expression changed from worried to terrified. "They found us." The next 30 seconds were chaos. A door slammed at the far end of the building. Boots on metal stairs. A flashlight beam swept across the rafters. Klaus shoved the bag toward Ellen. "Go. I'll hold them. We're not leaving you. You don't understand. If they take you, you disappear. If they take me, I'm already gone." He pushed them toward a side exit. A muffled pop echoed through the depot, the flat, horrible sound of suppressed gunshot. Ellen and Rami burst into the alley behind the depot, the cold Berlin air biting their lungs. They didn't stop running until they reached a street with traffic, blending into the pedestrians. When they finally dared to look back, there was no sign of Klaus, no pursuers, just a faint glow of police tape going up around the depot. In their hotel room that night, Ellen emptied the messenger bag onto the bed. Under the 6 passports was a small brown envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of paper covered in handwritten numbers and letters, GPS coordinates. At the bottom, one more line in Klaus's cramped handwriting. "Find the airfield before they find you." The GPS coordinates from Klaus's envelope pointed to a patch of remote forest in Västerbotten County, a 12-hour drive from Stockholm. The further north Ellen and Rami traveled, the sparser the traffic became. By the time they left the E4 and took the old military road, theirs was the only car for miles. Snow draped the trees in heavy silence. The airfield appeared like a ghost, a long, cracked strip of tarmac emerging from the forest, flanked by 2 decaying hangars whose roofs sagged under the weight of ice. It hadn't been on any active registry for decades. The Swedish Air Force had supposedly abandoned it in the early 1990s. They parked 100 meters back and approached on foot. The snow muffled everything except the occasional groan of wind through rusted sheet metal. In the smaller of the 2 hangars, they found tire tracks, fresh enough to cut through the frost. "Someone's been here recently," Rami murmured. At the center of the hangar, a metal cabinet stood alone. Its doors were padlocked, but the lock was cheap. Rami had it open in under a minute. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a slim black briefcase. Ellen set it on the concrete floor and snapped it open. The contents were neatly arranged. 1. A second photograph of Henrik Lofgren, taken in a crowded refugee camp. wearing a UN relief badge and standing beside a woman in desert fatigues. 2. A laminated map of northern Sweden marked with 3 red X's. 3. A passport, not one of the ones from Klaus's bag, bearing Henrik's photo and the name Oscar Nordin, issued by the United Nations Diplomatic Corps, but was the date on the photographs reversed that froze Ellen in place. February 14th, 2025. A date still weeks in the future. They searched the second hangar next. It was mostly empty except for a snow-covered tarp in the far corner. Rami pulled it back, revealing a snowmobile, and next to it, a large metal storage crate. Inside the crate, under layers of frost, was a black duffel bag. Ellen unzipped it slowly. Inside was a body. The skin was pale, almost waxy from the cold. The face was Henrik Lofgren's. But unlike the body S.A. with Diary Suspio had taken after the bridge incident, this one had no visible trauma. Ellen's breath fogged in the frigid air. How many of them are there? Before they could process the discovery, the faint chop of rotor blades reached them from the distance. A helicopter, approaching fast. They zipped the duffel shut and ran back toward the treeline. The snow was deep, their breath coming in harsh bursts. As they reached the cover of the pines, a matte black helicopter descended over the hangar, its searchlight sweeping the tarmac. Through the trees, Ellen saw men in tactical gear pouring out, moving with military precision. 2 went straight into the hangar. One emerged moments later, gesturing sharply toward the forest. Toward them. Rami grabbed Ellen's arm. "We have to go. Now." They didn't stop until they'd circled wide back to the car, driving away without headlights, praying the snow would cover their tracks before the helicopter's crew closed in. On the passenger seat, the black UN passport from the briefcase sat in Ellen's lap, and beneath it, the photograph of the date in the future. Proof that whatever was happening wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. The airfield had left Ellen with more questions and answers, especially about the second Henrik. But 2 days later, another lead surfaced from an unlikely source. It came in a plain padded envelope delivered to no one in particular at Normand Police Headquarters. No return address, no postage stamp. Inside was a single unmarked cassette tape and a sticky note that simply read, "Play it somewhere safe." They took it to Rami's apartment, a cramped top-floor space in Sodermalm with windows that rattled in the winter wind. He dug out an old cassette player from a storage box, blew the dust from it, and pressed play. Static filled the room. Then nothing. 3 minutes of pure silence. Ellen frowned. "This is it? A blank tape." Rami stopped the playback. Flipped, frustrated. He ejected the cassette and turned it over in his hand. That's when Ellen noticed a faint shimmer of metallic ink along its edge. They took the tape to a trusted contact, a cyber forensic specialist named Michaela, who examined it under UV light. Her eyebrows shot up. "There's a data layer embedded in the audio track. You can't hear it because it's not sound, it's an encoded signal." She ran the tape through a digital converter, the hiss translating into a jagged waterfall of numbers on her screen. "This is GPS data." Michaela zoomed in on the final seconds of data. "Wait! This shows 2 separate arrival times, one at 4:02 a.m. and another at 4:05 a.m. 2 vehicles?" Rami asked. "No," Michaela said, pointing at the screen. "The same transponder signal, which means whatever was in that SUV arrived twice," she said slowly. "Every 2 seconds, a new coordinate point. When plotted on a map, the trail began at Skepsholmsbron Bridge at exactly 2 hours, 13 minutes, and 4 seconds the night of the incident. From there, it traced a precise route through Stockholm's back streets, out toward the industrial port, then north along the E4 highway. The final coordinate made Ellen's skin prickle. The same abandoned airfield in Västerbotten County, where they had found the second Henrik. Ellen stared at the map, her mind flashing back to the duffel bag in the hangar. One Henrik on the bridge, another in the airfield, both tied to the same journey. As they left Michaela's office, Ellen's phone buzzed with a new text from an unknown number. "You have one more stop before it ends. Barn 42. You'll know where." The message, Barn 42. "You'll know where," was maddeningly vague, but Ellen did know. There was only one place in Sweden where she'd ever seen barns numbered like that. the old Cold War-era agricultural storage facilities scattered across the outskirts of Västerbotten. It took another 12 hours of driving along frozen back roads before they found it. Barn 42 sat alone on a windswept plain, its red paint peeling to gray, the numbers stenciled and faded white across a pair of warped double doors. The snow here was untouched, a perfect white sheet that stretched to the tree line. They approached cautiously, Rami covering her from a distance while Ellen tested the latch. It gave a metallic groan, and the smell hit her immediately. Cold, damp would mix with something faintly metallic and sour. Inside, shafts of pale light cut through gaps in the siding, illuminating stacks of rusted farm equipment. In the center, beneath a plastic tarp, lay a human shape. Ellen pulled the tarp back slowly. Henrik Lofgren stared up at her. Skin pale, lips bluish, eyes half closed in a frozen squint. As if even in death, he'd been trying to focus on something. Unlike the body in the duffel at the airfield, this one was fresh. Anders Nystrom's later estimate would put the time of death at no more than 6 hours earlier, weeks after the bridge incident. "This makes 3, Rami said quietly from behind her. Ellen shook her head. "No! This makes 2 confirmed deaths. The first body, the one SA with SPO took, we never proved it was Henrik. But this," she gestured at the man on the floor, "this is him, right here. And the other one in the hangar? He looked exactly the same." She noticed something else. The watch, the same stainless steel timepiece from the bridge photo, still strapped to his wrist. It was stopped at 2:13 a.m., the exact moment he'd been seen running barefoot across Skeppsholmsbron. They were about to bag the body when a noise made them both freeze. The sound of snow crunching, footsteps just outside the barn. Ellen flicked her flashlight toward the open doorway. For a split second, a figure stood silhouetted against the glare of the snowfield. Tall, broad-shouldered, face hidden in shadow. He didn't move toward them. He simply raised one hand, palm outward, and in it, Ellen saw the corner of a photograph. Before she could react, the figure dropped in the snow and walked away, vanishing into the white. The photograph was face down. She picked it up, brushing away ice crystals. Her own face stared back at her, taken from a distance. She was crossing Skeppsholmsbron, not in reality, but in a moment that hadn't happened yet. The timestamp on the corner read, February 14th, 2025, 2:13. The same date as the refugee camp photo from the airfield. The same time as Henrik's watch. And now apparently her time too. By the time Ellen and Rami returned to Stockholm with the second body, the city seemed quieter than usual. Streets felt emptier. Phones rang less often. Even the hum of traffic had a muted, almost artificial quality, like the world was holding its breath. They didn't get 24 hours before it happened. At 9:02 a.m., every file related to Henrik Lofgren vanished from a Violent Crimes Division's database. Not just the digital copies. Physical evidence lockers were stripped clean. Lab reports gone. Autopsy notes gone. Surveillance stills gone. At 9:14 a.m., Ellen was called into her superintendent's office. The man didn't meet her eyes as he read from a prepared statement. Effective immediately, the investigation into subject H. Lofgren is concluded. All future inquiries will be referred to the Ministry of Justice. You are not to discuss this case with colleagues, the press, or any third parties. This is a matter of national security. When she pressed him, he slid a single sheet across the desk. A formal gag order, stamped and signed by the Prime Minister's office. Rami's badge was suspended that same afternoon. No reason given. By evening, both of their personal bank accounts showed unexplained security audits that froze their funds. Their home internet went down. Their phones began receiving bursts of static during calls. At 11:46 p.m., someone knocked on Ellen's apartment door. 3 slow knocks. When she looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty, but on the floor lay a small padded envelope. No name, no return address. Inside was a single item, a passport. It was black, UN Diplomatic Corps. Her own face was on the photo page. The name read Ellen Forsberg, but the issuing country field was blank. The place of birth said only undisclosed. Taped to the inside cover was a note written in the same cramped handwriting she'd seen in Klaus Meyer's last message. "It's already started. When the snow falls in silence, run." The next morning, the first heavy snowfall of the season began to blanket Stockholm, and on the bridge at Skeppsholmsbron, under the black iron crown, a lone security camera captured an image: a woman barefoot running in the snow, her breath visible in the cold air, her face unmistakably Ellen's. The timestamp read February 14th, 2025, 2:13. Fade to black.